Welcome to the certification of the Congregation Temple, Israel. Did somebody say who? Let me acknowledge, first of all, some of the important people that are here tonight. Let me say welcome to Tom Hoffman. Thank you very much for being here. Let me just introduce to you now the people at our head table. Let's start at the far left with Leon King, President, Canadian Council of Liberal Congregations. Sitting next to Leon, Arthur Grant, Executive Director, Canadian Council of Liberal Congregations. And sitting again on my left, Rael Winberg. Let's call Rael the pilot of Temple Israel. The man that has taken us from, in the last few years, our beginning, our so we say prenatal, to tonight where we hope is the birth. And I should acknowledge, because I'm biased, that if Rael is the pilot, then certainly Karen Ross is the navigator. Because without Karen, the religious school would just be a name, it wouldn't be growing and going. I want to tell you that in checking with Arthur this evening, with Arthur Grant, I find that the Temple Israel today is the 20th Reformed synagogue in Canada. He says that that is today. Tomorrow, we cannot tell you. I want to just give you some of the understanding of how we arrived at the name Temple Israel. You should know that as any expectant parents, it's important to have a name that kind of typifies the character you hope the child will be. You choose the name David because you want that child to have wisdom and courage. You choose the name Ruth, let us say, for a girl, perhaps for the same reasons. So we deliberated over what kind of name did we want for Temple Israel, whose name we didn't know at the time. What did we want this temple to be? We decided that perhaps we wanted it to tell people that we are an upwardly mobile group. We thought of the name Temple Winnebago L. We discarded it. We thought maybe what we should do is choose a name that tells people that we do stand alongside Beth Tefillah. We do stand alongside Or Shalom. We came up with the name Temple Hasty Market. Got discarded. Finally, in desperation, I phoned my mother-in-law in Toronto. Very busy lady. She sends thousands of people to Israel every year. I figured Sarah must know a good name. I said, Sarah, it's Russell. She said, who? Gives you an idea of the kind of busy day she was having. I said, Sarah, I need a name for the temple. She said, Temple Schmemple. I said, it won't do, and I put the phone down. We decided that Temple Israel will tell people in both English and Hebrew exactly what we are. We are a Reformed temple, and we do feel strongly our ties with Israel. Tonight's guest speaker, if you'll turn to your program, we're going to be a little bit out of order. We're going to start with, my paper's out of order, hang on. We're going to start with Arthur Grant. And Arthur will talk to us for a few moments on the growth of Reformed Judaism in Canada. As Reformed Jews, it's important for us to know how we sit. What is our position in Canada? Our speaker tonight is Director of Canadian Council of Liberal Congregations, a Director of Kadima, the Reformed Zionist organization, and a Director of the NELFT, which is Northeastern Lakes Federation of Temple Youth. In his spare time, he teaches at Humber College on the subject of law enforcement and management studies. Arthur Grant.
Thank you. Can I be heard? Is that okay? It's really a pleasure to be here, and what I'd like to do for the next few moments is talk about the development and growth of Reformed Judaism in Canada. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to set the stage for North America. For those of you who have heard one of my two speeches, I apologize, but it's the nature of the business. Let me start off by saying that Reformed Judaism as a movement began in this world, if you will, about 4,000 years ago, but was identified and labeled at the beginning of the 19th century, actually in the year 1810 in Europe. That's where its roots were. In North America, it had its beginnings about 125 years ago, and its formal creation in the year 1873, where 35 congregations met in Cincinnati, Ohio, to create the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, the formal Reform movement in North America. Now you have to return with me now to that thrilling day in 1873 in Cincinnati and look at the sociological phenomena. It was in the United States of America, that part of the world that viewed itself as the answer to everything that was wrong in the rest of the world. And I don't say that cynically, and I do not say that negatively. I say that with the real understanding that for those people who built the United States, they viewed themselves as being at the place where action was to take place at that point and for the future. So that when the Reform movement was founded in 1873, it was founded with that positive statement that said, we are Americans, this is in the States, we are Americans and we are Jews. We will mesh the two together into a religious movement that fits in to the most important society the world will and has ever seen. And they formed this organization with 35 congregations. Now let me say as an aside, one of my favorite true humorous stories. You have to picture the Jewish community of the United States in the 1870s. There was a gentleman in New York City named Mordechai Noah. Mordechai Noah was a very prosperous individual. He was a bit of a mathematician. He put 2 and 2 together and came up with 5. He said, I am Jewish and I am American. How can I add those two things together to answer our prayers? And he said, I must come up with a homeland for the Jews. So what did he do? 20 years before Herzl invented Zionism, he said, I think I'm going to buy Grand Island. This little island by Niagara Falls. He says, I'll give that to the Jews as a homeland. Why? Jews need a homeland. America's the place of the future. Let's do it. Now that would have had certain positive impacts on all of us, especially your mother. Trips to Israel would be very inexpensive and relatively close. We could go there for the weekend. However, it is indicative of the tone, the emotion, the belief behind building an American Jewish movement. Now, interestingly enough, they were not praying at that time only as Reformed Jews. They would also pray in a traditionalism, but they viewed this as a natural evolution in Judaism. In the 1890s, something very important happened. They had a convention of the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, and they themselves put 2 and 2 together and came up with 5. They said, we are Jewish, but we are American. Let us have a gourmet banquet for our national convention. And I believe, and I forget the order of things, I think there were shrimp cocktail and ham, which did not attract the organization. What happened at that point was a group of members of the Union of American Hebrew Congregations said, wait a second, we've jumped too fast into Americanism. Our roots are still in Europe. And they split. And at that point, families such as the Stearns and the Warburgs out of the eastern United States formed the conservative movement. Okay? The conservative movement is an offshoot of the Reform movement. And what did they say at that time? They said, we must form the conservative movement to be that stepping stone between European traditionalism and American reform. And quite frankly, if you look at their writings and their early deliberations, they do not suggest that the conservative movement will last more than a generation or two, because no one could anticipate the mass immigration as a result of what went on in Europe in the 20s and 30s. So in actual fact, we had a movement there that was designed specifically for American Jews. I tell you that because it's important to understand that the roots in Canada are slightly different. In 1955, in Canada, there were only 3 congregations that were Reformed. 1 in Montreal, 1 in Toronto, and 1 in Hamilton. They were affiliated with this North American movement, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, because that's all that existed. But their background was totally different. These people came from Germany and England, where Reform Judaism had been a tradition for 100 years. They translated European reform into Canada as opposed to the American ideal into Canada. 3 congregations. Why were there only 3 at that time? Because you have to look at the rest of this country. Montreal, now these are not, these are generalizations, but they're not meant to be negative in any way, but we have to look at them. Montreal's community had a significant majority whose background was in Romania, and Toronto's community was Polish. So your 2 major communities in this entire country had their roots in Eastern European traditionalism that never had any involvement at all in Reform Judaism, whether in Europe or here. They were traditionalists. The Western Jews, many of them came under the program of the Baron de Hirsch, who was giving people incentives to build Jewish communities in Western Canada. None of the Canadian Jewish population, other than those 3 congregations, had their background in communities where Reform Judaism was either existent, or was existent, let alone viable. So we had a situation that by 1955, anybody who wanted to call himself a Reform Jew in Canada didn't do so as the Americans did, as saying the natural evolution. I'm American, it's apple pie and challah, and we're having a great time. They did so by decision and often by rebellion. Many people will know that in the 50s and 60s, to grow up as a Reform Jew in this country was replete with active rejection by those Jews who were not part of the Reform community. And all of those stereotypical statements were made, and believe me, I was there and I remember them, and that doesn't mean it happened all over the place, but as I travel in all the communities, we hear the same thing. Reform Judaism is not legitimate Judaism. Okay, you're Reform Jew, you're not Jewish. Okay, you don't do this and you don't do that. And in actual fact, we might even say that there were generations of Reform Jews who only identified themselves in the negative. We don't do this and we don't do that and we don't do this and we don't do that. And something happened in the late 50s that began to change that. What happened in the late 50s is that Jews living in Canada began to put 2 things together. A firm commitment to living in this world at this time, and a firm belief in their approach to their religion in the same way. Now, do not misinterpret anything I'm going to say from this time on. I am not in competition with either Orthodox or conservative Judaism. And I don't want you to misinterpret anything I say in the negative. There's plenty of room for all of us. But what began to happen in this country was the beginning of what I call the Age of Reform, the coming of age of groups of Jews who said, Reform, progressive, liberal Judaism is an expression of Judaism in the positive that we would like to participate in. One such congregation in Toronto called Temple Sinai is the first congregation, started with 13 families in 56. 13 families in 56, none of whom had backgrounds in Reform Judaism anywhere, all of whom built a unique Canadian religious expression in a liberal or progressive mold. We began to build. There were 3 congregations in Montreal, another couple in Toronto. All of a sudden, one shot up in Vancouver. At this time, we have them in every major community from Montreal to Vancouver. Interestingly enough for me, in the last 5 years, not only has London blossomed, but Calgary and Edmonton, and Winnipeg, other communities who are beginning to say there's something in Reform Judaism that is in the positive. And one of the things that has done this, by the way, has been the rejection of that ancient statement that said Reform Judaism was one step towards assimilationism. Now, why have they said that? Why have we rejected that statement? Because if you want to be assimilated, why join a synagogue? Okay? There are enough people here who can tell you that the time involvement, the anxiety, and the financial cost of being a member of a synagogue doesn't mesh with saying you want to be assimilated. So that even the critics of Reform Judaism have rejected that one. Because Reform Judaism does not equate to assimilationism, the opposite. It equates to the strength of a group that might not affiliate with other forms of Judaism. Now, I mentioned 1873, 35 congregations. 1890s, some of them left. What's our strength today? Just under 800 congregations. Now, that's not a long period of time. That's 100 years. 800 congregations. It's not a passing fad, folks. Okay? It's here to stay. It's here to grow. I've just come back from Halifax. It's about 20 miles east of here, where something very interesting happened. I was called in by a group within the community that said the following. There's an Orthodox congregation and a conservative congregation. We would like to teach our kids, grow religiously as a Reform group. Now, there are not a lot of Jews in Halifax, and we're not going to build another synagogue. But what we are going to do is create a chavurah, a group of 12 or 24 families who will educate, pray, and grow together in a Reform community. And as soon as people heard that was taking place, I find this very interesting, Regina called me, Saskatoon, Kelowna, BC, wherever that is, but I think they produce some of the stuff at the back of the room, and we have an interesting phenomenon taking place, that in the very positive, Jews that might otherwise have not been affiliated with the community have begun to call and say, is there a way that we can create a Jewish atmosphere for ourselves and our families with which we can be comfortable? That's it, eh? Okay. I've been gonged before. And with which our families can grow. This afternoon I spent a few hours with a man by the name of Professor Michael Zeldin, a professor of education at our rabbinic college in Los Angeles. And the topic was Jewish day schools, something about which many of you have knowledge. In 1969, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations in their plenary session rejected the concept of Jewish day schools in the Reform movement. In 1985, next Monday morning, a motion encouraging the growth of such schools will most likely be passed in Los Angeles. I say most likely because in my circle of professional colleagues, I have not heard anybody raise any negatives, and usually that's a fairly good barometer. What's taking place? What's taking place is a reevaluation of education in general. In 1975, 10% of North American children went to private schools. Most of the private schools were the Catholic private schools. In 1985, 12.5% of North American school children go to private schools. There is a decline in Catholic school enrollment, which means there's something like a 25 to 30% increase in private school attendance. So in one sense, people are looking toward a private educational program. In the second sense, and this is where I came into my meeting this afternoon, they're looking for that as a viable religious experience as well. As I said, 15 years ago, day schools were rejected by the movement. Today there are 12. Probably within 10 years, there will be 50 or 60 Reformed Jewish day schools. In other words, as I said earlier, we're not in competition with people. We're providing a situation that says a positive religious expression in communities by that segment that might not otherwise be involved or might choose to be involved in our stream of Judaism strengthens Judaism nationally in Canada, communally here. As a matter of fact, I remember reading last year at Rosh Hashanah, one of the communal leaders in this community made the statement when Temple Israel was without a name. Said, this new group of Reformed Jews can only strengthen Jewish life in London because anyone who affiliates strengthens the community. And in the Reformed Jewish movement, that affiliation is now one of the most positive, one of the most demanding activities in North American Jewish life. And as Russell said, in choosing this name, there was a strong commitment to Israel. I would be remiss if I did not talk about something that is connecting to us there. In 1948, when the State of Israel was founded, there were no Reformed Jews in Israel to speak of. In 1985, there are 15 congregations, 2 kibbutzim, a rabbinic seminary, and a center for Jewish life, second to none, and bringing together the World Union for Progressive Judaism, Reform Judaism, where no other Jewish movement has its world headquarters in that location. An amazing fact. So I bring that into the present and into this community. You're the 20th congregation in this country. That's only part of it. You're the 17th congregation in the last 20 years, and that's amazing growth. You now link with my Halifax Chavurah Jews of a common religious bent, a common religious direction, a common religious commitment, and a diverse expression of it from community to community, from here to Vancouver. And if you think of it, if you go for 2 hours to the east, you've got Toronto with its 7 Reform congregations. And if you go 2 hours to the west, you've got Windsor and Detroit with one of the most vibrant and exciting Reformed Jewish communities in North America. From my perspective, as the person who runs around this country, responding to whatever, this has been one of the most significant steps in Reformed Judaism in the last 25 years. A group of people, responsible members of this community, looking for an expression that makes sense today, an expression of strong commitment, of viability that will ensure the Jewish future of a large segment of our society. Mazal tov, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arthur, for that brief but informative update on our history and our roots. You will notice in the program that we have Rabbi Howard Hoffman. We are hoping that he will be able to get here in time, so we're going to hold off until the last moment. But we do have Elaine Hoffman here, who is, I guess, to use the terms of today, pinch hitting. Okay, so we will move on right now to the certification. And right now I'd like to introduce to you the gentleman that's going to present the certificate to Temple Israel, Leon King. Leon has been, is president of the Canadian Council of Liberal Congregations. He was the past president of Temple Sinai, the past president of B'nai B'rith Canada Lodge in Toronto. And there is a note that I've just scratched down here, which we decided not to talk about. But you will notice, of course, as he talks, that Leon and I do share a common heritage. We're both from London, England, that is. Leon, please come and talk to us. Leon King.
It wasn't until I arrived here this evening that I realized that my task was to certify the members of Temple Israel. I must confess that I've played around with that statement for the last 15 minutes for a response, and I've rejected every single one of them. Thank you very much, Russell, for your very kind introduction. I can see a great future for you in the synagogue movement because you managed to keep things extremely brief, and that's the way, of course, it should be. One of the problems, I suppose, with us involved synagogue Jews is that we have a common fault, and that is that we always talk too much. I must confess I include myself in that group. Those of you who have become involved in Temple Israel know that there's always a member of your board who insists, once he gets the floor, in talking and talking and talking to the frustration of absolutely everybody else. I recall on one particular occasion when that occurred, when the chairman would never like to give this particular person on the board the floor, but he reluctantly had to do so, and the person then proceeded to talk and talk and talk. He banged his gavel on the table many times, and no response at all. And finally, in desperation, he leaned across the table with his gavel and he was going to hit the guy. But he slipped and he beamed the guy beside him. And as the fellow slid below the table, he was heard to say, "Hit me again, I can still hear him." Russell, I know you won't be guilty of that. Unfortunately, one of my strong points, I must confess, is not speaking in public. I know, of course, my facts. I feel like Elizabeth Taylor's seventh husband. I know what's required of me. I don't know how to make it exciting. I don't think that this city of London is really very different with regard to its Jewish community than most other major metropolitan cities across this continent. We Jews in major cities have built many, many institutions. Today we have Jewish social clubs, athletic clubs, boating clubs, community centers. But the only Jewish institution which will survive for the transmission of our faith and Jewish values is the synagogue. The synagogue was established in the 5th century before the Common Era by the scribe Ezra as a focal point for the returning exiles from Babylon. It was he who instituted the weekly reading from Torah. And today, here, the members of Temple Israel will continue that tradition unbroken for the past 2,500 years. Many things have affected our lives as Jews in the last 50 years. The Holocaust has caused every Jew to re-examine his relationship to God and his relationship to his fellow man. The establishment of the State of Israel after 2,000 years of exile has brought about a new feeling of nationalism among Jews, sometimes to our discredit. In our headlong rush to support everything that's Jewish, we assume that everything that's Jewish is right. And although the State of Israel is of primary importance to us all, we must consider and remember that it is our covenant relationship with God that will speak to our survival in the centuries ahead, and not the safety of the state, which stands at the whim of unfriendly nations or an unfriendly Secretary of State. Our synagogues across the continent today face many problems. This is strange because our membership is growing, and in the Reform movement, as Arthur has mentioned, we are a dynamic growth group. But changes in lifestyle have brought about a number of concerns for us synagogue Jews. First, our newfound affluence is having a great bearing on synagogue life. Today, many of our members, of course, own their own homes, but some own second homes. And in Toronto, for example, we have a strange phenomena where at this very time of the year, many of our synagogue families are planning an entire winter of weekends with their children at their ski lodges. These effects drain important human resources from the life of the synagogue, human resources that are not readily replaceable. Secondly, Although we're very pleased that people are living longer, it has a strange effect on us Jews. Coupled with a reduction in our birth rate, we are becoming an aging population. The average age of our congregation is going up. The result of this is that many of these senior citizens are finding warmer climes also at this time of the year and prefer to spend their time on sun-drenched beaches. Who can blame them? But nevertheless, once again, draining the synagogue of an important human resource. In the past 10 years, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of Judaic study courses offered by our secular universities, and this is a great advantage. Somewhat offset, though, by a reduction in the effectiveness of the Hillel organization on these campuses. Again, many of our students are electing to go to school away from home, and with this newfound freedom that they now enjoy, are experimenting with alternative lifestyles, and interfaith and intermarriage is going to continue to be a concern in how we handle our synagogues of the future. And fourthly, the Jewish way of life has always emphasized the sense of community. But that is not the Canadian way, which emphasizes the individual, often on an egocentric collision course with traditional Jewish values. So these four factors are having an effect on the way that we synagogue Jews plan our lives and we plan the affairs of our synagogues. And some of these factors will have a bearing on the future generation of Temple Israel, its administration, and its officers. The Temple Israel has a number of singular advantages. First of all, Temple Israel is a small congregation. And that's the way it should be. That's the way the synagogue should be. It should be small because the synagogue is an extension at the community level of the Jewish family. Everybody knows everybody else. So in some ways you have a singular advantage because of your smallness. You also are a young group of people. And young people are dynamic in their attitudes and in their ability to plan the future. And thirdly, we like to feel that one great advantage is that you have decided not to take the path alone. You have decided to affiliate with the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. As Arthur has mentioned, more than 800 sister congregations that you're joining, well over 1 million affiliated Reformed Jews across North America. It should be borne in mind that you retain entirely your autonomy. No priest-like pronouncements come from New York of what you may and may not do. But by associating and affiliating with so many congregations, you can share the resources, the human resources that sometimes are not always available to you at the congregational level. You have the opportunity to interact and to meet with many, many people whose feelings and thoughts are along the same lines as your own. For many years, we have nurtured the hope that we would be able to affiliate a Reformed congregation in the City of London. It's especially satisfying to me that during my term as President of the Canadian Council that this could have come about. And it is therefore with great pleasure that I duly accept you into membership of the Union of American Congregations. Wish you health and good luck and strength in the years ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leon. I should mention to you that actually we're pleased to hear that you're proud that you're here tonight. We should tell you, really, it's a bit of an accident. The reason that Karen and I are here in London in the first place is because they offered me a job promotion. And they said, would I like to open up a new office in London? I said, yes. They said, Ontario. I said, Ontario? So it was really, it's an accident. If everybody believes in fate, that's good. Next on our program tonight, we're going to hear the response from Rael. Before we get to Rael, let me just tell you a little story about Golda Meir when she met President Nixon. And President Nixon said, "Madam President, I am the president of 250 million people." And she looked up at him and she said, "No." She said, "I am the president of 3 million presidents." If you understand that story, you understand what it must be like to be Rael. You can appreciate some of the difficulties that he's gone through in the past and probably will continue to go through. Rael, again, like a lot of us here, it seems tonight, are immigrants to this city. Rael came from South Africa. And when did you come here, Rael? 8 years ago, a newcomer to this country. Anyway, tonight we're going to hear the response to Leon from Rael Winberg. Thank you.
Unaccustomed as I am being on this side of the camera, I'm very pleased to see so many friends here tonight. Welcome. On behalf of the Temple Israel congregation, I'm very pleased to accept the certificate as membership in the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. Although we've only been in existence for a short period of time, we've had many well-attended services and events. These include 2 high holiday seasons, Shabbat services, and 3 bar and bat mitzvahs. By bringing Reform Judaism to London, we offer the unaffiliated a growing congregation that has already committed itself to being involved in the London Jewish community. Our school, noticed a few teachers here tonight, continues to grow, and our 3 classes offer a full Judaic program. None of this would have been possible without a great deal of hard work by our members. And I wish to take this opportunity to thank all of them who are here tonight. A special thanks to those who have come forward with donations to our synagogue and Torah Fund, to our Vice President Karen Ross, who is attending the Biennial Congress of the North American Reform Movement in Los Angeles with her husband Russell. Thank you for your untiring efforts on behalf of the Temple Israel congregation over the past year. I'm repeating a well-earned thank you. Finally, to Arthur and Leon, your efforts with regard to our affiliation and many other involvements have been sincerely appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rael. At this point, and I guess since Rabbi Hoffman has been unable to get here at this moment, we'd like to ask Elaine Hoffman, would you please come forward? Let us just tell you that our relationship with Or Shalom is extremely warm, and they've shown us a lot of understanding. They've been very helpful. In fact, during the Yom Tov services, they were able to lend us a Torah, which shows you the kind of spirit that we're receiving in this city, and we're really pleased to have Elaine Hoffman up to talk for a few moments. Thank you.
I have to bring apologies from my husband. He had a prior commitment. He's representing the Jews tonight at the interdenominational interfaith meeting. I think it's for nuclear disarmament. But I bring from him, I guess it will be a closing bracha rather than an invocation. The Talmud records, even though the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel often disagreed on important matters, this did not prevent them from marrying members of each other's circle. In that same spirit of mutual respect for differences and acceptance of each other, we ask, Hu yiftach libeinu b'torato, v'yasem b'libeinu ahavato, v'yirato, v'lasot ritzono, v'la'ovdo b'lavev shalem, l'ma'an lo niga larik, v'lo neled labehala. May the Lord open our hearts to His Torah and inspire us to love and revere Him, to do His will and wholeheartedly serve Him, so that we may neither labor in vain nor give birth to confusion. Hashem oz la'amo yitain, Hashem yavarech et amo v'shalom. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace.
Well, we've reached the end of our presentation this evening. We've received our certificate and we've heard our words from our table here. Our plans for the future? Well, certainly I hope by this time next year we will have a rabbi. Oh yeah? The ad goes in tomorrow. We are hoping and we're working very quickly towards a permanent home, one where we can actually call our own. I keep thinking of a story I heard when I was a little child about a famous rabbi whose name I can't remember, I'm sure Arthur will be able to tell me, who was once asked by a non-Jew, what is the meaning? He said, can you explain to me the Old Testament while standing on one leg? And the rabbi said, that's very simple. He said, don't do unto others what you wouldn't want done to yourself. All the rest is commentary. And it's that. If we bring in those who are standing on the edge of Judaism, if we welcome those who will feel that Reform Judaism allows them to express their Jewishness, if we can achieve all this, we will achieve our goal. And after all, isn't that bringing Jews back to Judaism what it's all about? Thanks very much. We're glad that you could come out and help us share this first Simcha. And good night. You've still got time for the rest of the innings, I believe. There's more wine, more cheese. You don't have to rush away if you don't want to. Those of you that follow cricket.
You should have a picture of you and Leon with this.